South Africa is the southernmost country in Africa. Its 9 provinces are bounded to the south by 2,798 kilometers of coastline that stretches along South Atlantic and Indian Ocean. To the north are neighboring countries of Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. To the east and northeast by Mozambique and Eswatini. It encloses Lesotho. Covering an area of 1,221,037 square kilometers, it is the 24th largest country in the world and was the southernmost country on the mainland of the Old World. With over 62 million people, South Africa is the world's 23rd most populous nation and the second most populous country located entirely south of the equator after Tanzania. Pretoria is the administrative capital, while Cape Town, as the seat of parliament, is the legislative capital. Bloemfontein has traditionally been regarded as the judicial capital. The largest and most populous city is Johannesburg, followed by Cape Town, and the largest port city in sub-Saharan Africa, Durban. Archaeological findings suggest that various hominid species existed in South Africa about 2.5 million years ago. Modern humans inhabited the region over 100,000 years ago. The first known people were the indigenous Khorasan and Bantu-speaking peoples from West and Central Africa, later settled in the region in the early centuries 2,000 years ago. In 1652, Dutch established the first European settlement at Table Bay. In 1795 and 1806, British occupied it. Diamonds and gold were discovered in the 19th century, bringing a shift towards industrialization and urbanization. The Union of South Africa was created in 1910 out of the former Cape, Natal, Transvaal and Orange River colonies. Though a system of non-racial franchise had existed in the Cape, it was gradually eroded and the vast majority of black South Africans were not enfranchised until 1994. During 20th century, the black majority sought to claim more rights from the dominant white minority, which played a large role in the country's recent history and politics. The National Party imposed apartheid in 1948, institutionalizing previous racial segregation. After a largely non-violent struggle by the African National Congress and other anti-apartheid activists both inside and outside the country, the repeal of discriminatory laws began in the mid-1980s. Universal elections took place in 1994, following which all racial groups have held political representation in the country's liberal democracy, which comprises a parliamentary republic and 9 provinces. Today, about 80% of the population are black South Africans. The remaining population consists of Africa's largest communities of multiracial, European, and Asian ancestry. South Africa is a multi-ethnic society encompassing a wide variety of cultures, languages, and religions. Its pluralistic makeup is reflected in the Constitution's recognition of 12 official languages, the 4th highest number in the world. According to 2022 census, the 2 most spoken first languages are Zulu, 24.4%, and Xhosa, 16.3%, which are both of the Nguni branch. The 3rd and 5th are of European origin. Afrikaans, 10.6%, developed from Dutch, serves as the first language of most colored and white South Africans, while English, 8.7%, reflects the legacy of British colonialism and is commonly used in public and commercial life. South Africa is often referred to as the Rainbow Nation to describe the country's multicultural diversity, especially in the wake of apartheid. South Africa is a middle power in international affairs. It maintains significant regional influence and is a member of BRICS, African Union, SADC, SACU, Commonwealth of Nations and G20. A developing, newly industrialized country, South Africa has the largest economy in Africa and the 38th largest in the world by nominal GDP, became a $1 trillion economy in 2024. Ranks 110th on the Human Development Index, the 7th highest on the continent. South Africa is the only African nation to legislate same-sex marriage. It is tied with Ethiopia for the most UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Africa. A biodiversity hotspot with unique biomes, plant and animal life. Since the end of apartheid, government accountability and quality of life have substantially improved. However, crime, poverty and inequality remain widespread, with about 40% of the total population unemployed as of 2021, while some 60% of the population lived below the poverty line and a quarter lived below $2.15 a day. Having the highest Gini coefficient of 63.0, South Africa is considered one of the most unequal countries in the world, if not the most unequal. Prehistoric archaeology. South Africa contains some of the oldest archaeological and human fossil sites in the world. Archaeologists have recovered extensive fossil remains from a series of caves in Gauteng province. The area, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, has been branded the cradle of humankind. The sites include Sterkfontein Waikai is one of the richest sites for hominin fossils in the world, as well as Swartkrans, Gondolin Cave, Kromdraai, Cooper's Cave and Malapa. Raymond Dart identified the first hominin fossil discovered in Africa, the Taung child, found near Taung, in 1924. Other hominin remains have come from the sites of Makapansgat in Limpopo Province, Cornelia and Florisbad in Free State Province, Border Cave in KwaZulu-Natal Province, Clacies River Caves in Eastern Cape Province, and Pinnacle Point, Elandsfontein and Dijkelders Cave in Western Cape Province. These finds suggest that various hominid species existed in South Africa from about 3 million years ago. Modern humans have inhabited southern Africa for at least 170,000 years. Various researchers have located pebble tools within the Vaal River Valley. Portuguese exploration. In 1487, Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias led the first European voyage to land in southern Africa. On the 4th of December, he landed at Walfish Bay, known as Walvis Bay in present-day Namibia. This was south of the furthest point reached in 1485 by his predecessor, the Portuguese navigator Diogo Cao, Cape Cross, north of the bay. Dias continued down the western coast of southern Africa. After the 8th of January 1488, prevented by storms from proceeding along the coast, he sailed out of sight of land and passed the southernmost point of Africa without seeing it. He reached as far up the eastern coast of Africa as what he called Rio do Infante, probably the present-day Groot River, in May 1488. On his return, he saw the cape which he named Cabo das Tormentas, Cape of Storms. King John II renamed the point Cabo da Boa, Dutch colonization. By early 17th century, Portugal's maritime power starting to decline. English and Dutch merchants competed to oust Portugal from its lucrative monopoly on the spice trade. Representatives of the British East India Company sporadically called at the Cape in search of provisions as early as 1601, but later came to favour Ascension Island and St. Helena as alternative ports of refuge. Dutch interest was aroused after 1647, when 2 employees of Dutch East India Company were shipwrecked at the Cape for several months. The sailors were able to survive by obtaining fresh water and meat from the natives. They also sowed vegetables in the fertile soil. Upon their return to Holland, they reported favourably on the Cape's potential as a warehouse and garden for provisions to stock passing ships for long voyages. In 1652, a century and a half after the discovery of the Cape Sea route, Jan van Riebeeck established a victualling station at the Cape of Good Hope, at what would become Cape Town, on behalf of the Dutch East India Company. In time, the Cape became home to a large population of Vrijleden, free citizens. Former company employees who stayed in Dutch territories overseas after serving their contracts. Dutch traders also brought thousands of enslaved people to the fledgling colony from Indonesia, Madagascar, and parts of Eastern Africa. Some of the earliest mixed-race communities in the country were formed between Vrijburgers, enslaved people, and indigenous peoples. This led to the development of a new ethnic group, the Cape Coloureds, most of whom adopted the Dutch language and Christian faith. The eastward expansion of Dutch colonists ushered in a series of wars with the southwesterly migrating Xhosa tribe, known as the Xhosa Wars, as both sides competed for the pastureland near the Great Fish River, which the colonists desired for grazing cattle. Vrijburgers who became independent farmers on the frontier were known as Boers, with some adopting semi-nomadic lifestyles being denoted as trek Boers. The Boers formed loose militias which they termed commandos and forged alliances with Khorasan peoples to repel Xhosa raids. Both sides launched bloody but inconclusive offensives, and sporadic violence, often accompanied by livestock theft, remained common for several decades. British colonization and the Great Trek. Great Britain occupied Cape Town between 1795 and 1803 to prevent it from falling under the control of French First Republic, which had invaded the Low Countries. After briefly returning to Dutch rule under the Batavian Republic in 1803, the Cape was occupied again by the British in 1806. Following the end of Napoleonic Wars, it was ceded to Great Britain and became an integral part of the British Empire. British emigration to South Africa began around 1818, subsequently culminating in the arrival of the 1820 settlers. The new colonists were induced to settle for a variety of reasons, namely to increase the size of the European workforce and to bolster frontier regions against coarser incursions. In the first 2 decades of 19th century, Zulu people grew in power and expanded their territory under their leader, Shaka. Shaka's warfare indirectly led to the Mafeking crushing, in which 1 to 2 million people were killed, and the inland plateau was devastated and depopulated in the early 1820s. An offshoot of the Zulu, the Matabele people created a larger empire that included large parts of the Highveld under their king Mzilikazi. During the early 19th century, many Dutch settlers departed from the Cape Colony where they had been subjected to British control in a series of migrant groups who came to be known as voortrekkers, pathfinders or pioneers. They migrated to the future Natal, Free State and Transvaal regions. The Boers founded the Boer Republics, South African Republic, Natalia Republic and Orange Free State. The discovery of diamonds in 1867 and gold in 1884 in the interior started the mineral revolution and increased economic growth and immigration. This intensified British subjugation of the indigenous people. The struggle to control these important economic resources was a factor in relations between Europeans and indigenous population, Boers, and the British. On the 16th of May 1876, President Thomas Francois Burgers of South African Republic declared war against PD people. King Sekhukhune managed to defeat the army on the 1st of August 1876. Another attack by the Lydenburg Volunteer Corps was also repulsed. On the 16th of February 1877, the two parties signed a peace treaty at Botshabelo. The Boers' inability to subdue the PD led to the departure of Burgers in favor of Paul Kruger and the British annexation of the South African Republic. In 1878 and 1879 3 British attacks were successfully repelled until Garnet Wolseley defeated Sekhukhune in November 1879 with an army of 2,000 British soldiers, Boers, and 10,000 Swazis. The Anglo-Zulu War was fought in 1879 between the British and the Zulu Kingdom. Following Lord Carnarvon's successful introduction of federation in Canada, it was thought that similar political effort, coupled with military campaigns, might succeed with the African kingdoms, tribal areas, and Boer republics in South Africa. In 1874, Henry Bartle Frere was sent to South Africa as the British High Commissioner to execute these plans. Among the obstacles were the presence of the independent states of the Boers and the Zululand Army. The Zulu nation defeated the British at the Battle of Isandlwana. Eventually Zululand lost the war, resulting in the termination of the Zulu nation's independence. Independence. Anti-British policies among white South Africans focused on independence. During the Dutch and British colonial years, racial segregation was mostly informal, though some legislation was enacted to control the settlement and movement of indigenous people, including the Native Location Act of 1879 and the system of pass laws. 8 years after the end of the Second Boer War and after 4 years of negotiation, the South Africa Act 1909 granted nominal independence while creating the Union of South Africa on the 31st of May 1910. The Union was a dominion that included the former territories of the Cape, Transvaal and Natal colonies, as well as the Orange Free State Republic. The Natives Land Act of 1913 severely restricted the ownership of land by blacks. At that stage, they controlled only 7% of the country. The amount of land reserved for indigenous peoples was later marginally increased. In 1931, the Union became fully sovereign from the United Kingdom with the passage of the Statute of Westminster, which abolished the last powers of the Parliament of the United Kingdom to legislate in the country. Only 3 other African countries, that is Liberia, Ethiopia, and Egypt, had been independent prior to that point. In 1934, South African Party and National Party merged to form the United Party, seeking reconciliation between Afrikaners and English-speaking whites. In 1939, the party split over the entry of the Union into World War II as an ally of the United Kingdom, a move which National Party followers opposed. Post-apartheid. The Malabatini Declaration of Faith, signed by Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Harry Schwartz in 1974, enshrined the principles of peaceful transition of power and equality for all. The first of such agreements by black and white political leaders in South Africa. Ultimately, F.W. de Klerk opened bilateral discussions with Nelson Mandela in 1993 for a transition of policies and government. In 1990, National Party government took the first step towards dismantling discrimination when it lifted the ban on the ANC and other political organizations. It released Nelson Mandela from prison after 27 years of serving a sentence for sabotage. A negotiation process followed. With approval from the white electorate in a 1992 referendum, the government continued negotiations to end apartheid. South Africa held its first universal elections in 1994, which ANC won by an overwhelming majority. It has been in power ever since. The country rejoined the Commonwealth of Nations and became a member of the Southern African Development Community. In post-apartheid South Africa, unemployment remained high. While many blacks have risen to middle or upper classes, the overall unemployment rate of black people worsened between 1994 and 2003 by official metrics, but declined significantly using expanded definitions. Poverty among whites, which was previously rare, increased. The government struggled to achieve the monetary and fiscal discipline to ensure both redistribution of wealth and economic growth. The United Nations Human Development Index rose steadily until the mid-1990s, then fell from 1995 to 2005 before recovering its 1995 peak in 2013. The fall is in large part attributable to the South African HIV and AIDS pandemic, which saw South African life expectancy fall from a high point of 62 years in 1992 to a low of 53 in 2005, and the failure of the government to take steps to address the pandemic in its early years. In May 2008, riots left over 60 people dead. The Center on Housing Rights and Evictions estimated that over 100,000 people were driven from their homes. The targets were mainly legal and illegal migrants and refugees seeking asylum, but a third of the victims were South African citizens. In a 2006 survey, the South African Migration Project concluded that South Africans are more opposed to immigration than any other national group. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees in 2008 reported that over 200,000 refugees applied for asylum in South Africa, almost 4 times as many as the year before. These people were mainly from Zimbabwe, though many also come from Burundi, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Rwanda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Competition over jobs, business opportunities, public services, and housing has led to tension between refugees and host communities. While xenophobia in South Africa is still a problem, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in 2011 reported that recent violence had not been as widespread as initially feared. Nevertheless, as South Africa continues to grapple with racial issues, one of the proposed solutions has been to pass legislation, such as the pending hate crimes and hate speech bill, to uphold South Africa's ban on racism and commitment to equality. On the 14th of February 2018, Jacob Zuma resigned the presidency. Since the 15th of February, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa has been president of South Africa. On the 16th of March 2018, just over a month after President Jacob Zuma resigned from the presidency, National Director of Public Prosecutions Shaun Abrahams announced that Zuma would again face prosecution on 16 criminal charges. 12 charges of fraud, 2 of corruption, and 1 each of racketeering and money laundering, just as in the 2006 indictment. A warrant was issued for his arrest in February 2020 after he failed to appear in court. In 2021, he was found guilty of contempt of court and sentenced to 15 months imprisonment. In response, supporters of Zuma engaged in protests which led to riots, looting, vandalism and widespread violence, leaving 354 people dead. South Africa has been undergoing a period of intense political and economic crisis since 2020, with growing numbers of international institutions, businesses, and political figures warning that the country risks collapsing into a failed state due to high unemployment, low economic growth, low business investment, rising levels of violent crime, disorder, political corruption, and state capture. The country undergoing an energy crisis since 2007, resulting in routine rolling electricity blackouts due to load shedding. According to the International Monetary Fund, South Africa is suffering from massive corruption and state capture. The Zondo Commission, established in 2018 in order to investigate allegations of corruption and state capture, released its findings in 2022. It found rampant corruption at every level of government, including Transnet, Eskom and Denel, as well as law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and the civil service. It documented evidence of systemic corruption, fraud, racketeering, bribery, money laundering and state capture. It investigated the African National Congress Party and Jacob Zuma, whom it concluded were complicit in state capture through their direct assistance to the Gupta family. The commission estimated the total amount of money spent by the state which was tainted by state capture to be around 57 billion. More than 97% of the 57 billion came from Transnet and Eskom. Out of these funds, Gupta Enterprise received at least 15 billion. The total loss to the state is difficult to quantify but would far exceed that 15 billion. South Africa has maintained a position of neutrality in regards to the Russia invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the ongoing war. On the 29th of December 2023, South Africa formally submitted its case to the International Court of Justice regarding Israel's conduct in the Gaza Strip as part of the Israel-Hamas war, alleging that Israel had committed and was committing genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. South Africa has repeatedly hosted senior leaders of Hamas, the group responsible for the October 7th massacre in Israel. Following 2024 general elections, African National Congress saw its share of the national vote fall below 50% for the first time since the end of apartheid, though it remained the single largest party in the South African parliament. President Ramaphosa announced a national unity government, the first since the cabinet of Nelson Mandela, and entered a deal with the Democratic Alliance, the previous main opposition party, and other minor parties. Ramaphosa was re-elected for a second term in office by the National Assembly against the leader of the economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema. Geography. South Africa is in southernmost Africa with a coastline that stretches more than 2,500 kilometers and along South Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. At 1,219,912 kilometers square, South Africa is the 24th largest country in the world. Excluding the Prince Edward Islands, the country lies between latitudes 22 degrees and 35 degrees south and longitudes 16 degrees and 33 degrees east. The interior of South Africa consists of a large, in most places almost flat plateau with an altitude of between 1,000 meters and 2,100 meters. Highest in the east and sloping gently downwards towards the west and north and slightly to the south and southwest. This plateau is surrounded by the Great Escarpment whose eastern and highest stretch is known as the Drakensberg. Mafadi in the Drakensberg at 3,450 meters is the highest peak. The KwaZulu-Natal, Lesotho international border is formed by the highest portion of the Great Escarpment which reaches an altitude of over 3,000 meters. The south and southwestern parts of the plateau at approximately 1,100 to 1,800 meters above sea level. The adjoining plain below at 700 to 800 meters above sea level is known as Great Karoo, which consists of sparsely populated shrubland. To the north, Great Karoo fades into the more arid bushmanland, which eventually becomes the Kalahari Desert in the northwest of the country. The mid-eastern and highest part of the plateau is known as the Highveld. This relatively well-watered area is home to a great proportion of the country's commercial farmlands and contains its largest conurbation, Gauteng. To the north of Highveld, the plateau slopes downwards into the bushveld, which ultimately gives way to the Limpopo River lowlands or Lowveld. The coastal belt, below the Great Escarpment, moving clockwise from the northeast, consists of the Limpopo Lowveld, which merges into the Mpumalanga Lowveld, below the Mpumalanga Drakensberg. This is hotter, drier, and less intensely cultivated than the Highveld above the escarpment. The Kruger National Park, located in Limpopo and Mpumalanga in northeastern South Africa, occupies a large portion of the Lowveld covering 19,633 square kilometers. The coastal belt below the south and southwestern stretches of the Great Escarpment contains several ranges of Cape Fold Mountains which run parallel to the coast, separating the Great Escarpment from the ocean. The land between the Outeniqua and Langeberg ranges to the south and the Swartberg range to the north is known as the Little Karoo, which consists of semi-desert shrubland similar to that of the Great Karoo, except that its northern strip along the foothills of the Swartberg Mountains has a somewhat higher rainfall and is therefore more cultivated than the Great Karoo. The Little Karoo is famous for its ostrich farming around Oud Shawn. The lowland area to the north of the Swartberg Range up to the Great Escarpment is the lowland part of the Great Karoo, which is climatically and botanically almost indistinguishable from the Karoo above the Great Escarpment. The narrow coastal strip between the Outeniqua and Langeberg Ranges and the ocean has a moderately high year-round rainfall, which is known as the Garden Route. It is famous for the most extensive areas of forests in South Africa, a generally forest-poor country. In the southwest corner of the country, Cape Peninsula forms the southernmost tip of the coastal strip, which borders the Atlantic Ocean and ultimately terminates at the country's border with Namibia at the Orange River. The Cape Peninsula has a Mediterranean climate, making it and its immediate surrounds the only portion of sub-Saharan Africa which receives most of its rainfall in winter. The coastal belt to the north of the Cape Peninsula is bounded on the west by the Atlantic Ocean and the first row of north-south running Cape Fold Mountains to the east. The Cape Fold Mountains peter out at about the 32 degrees south line of latitude, after which the Great Escarpment bounds the coastal plain. The most southerly portion of this coastal belt is known as the Swartland and Malmesbury Plain, which is an important wheat-growing region, relying on winter rains. The region further north is known as Namaqualand, which becomes more arid near the Orange River. The little rain that falls tends to fall in winter, which results in one of the world's most spectacular displays of flowers carpeting huge stretches of veldt in spring, August to September. South Africa also has one offshore possession, the small subantarctic archipelago of the Prince Edward Islands, consisting of Marion Island and Prince Edward Island. Climate. Climate change in South Africa is leading to increased temperatures and rainfall variability. Extreme weather events are becoming more prominent. This is a critical concern for South Africans as climate change will affect the overall status and well-being of the country, for example with regards to water resources. Speedy environmental changes are resulting in clear effects on the community and environmental level in different ways and aspects, starting with air quality to temperature and weather patterns, reaching out to food security and disease burden. According to computer-generated climate modeling produced by the South African National Biodiversity Institute, parts of southern Africa will see an increase in temperature by about 1 degree Celsius along the coast to more than 4 degrees Celsius in the already hot hinterland such as Northern Cape in late spring and summertime by 2050. The Cape Floral region is predicted to be hit very hard by climate change. Drought, increased intensity and frequency of fire, and climbing temperatures are expected to push many rare species towards extinction. South Africa contributes considerable carbon dioxide emissions, being the 14th largest emitter of carbon dioxide from its heavy reliance on coal and oil for energy production. As part of its international commitments, South Africa has pledged to peak emissions between Biodiversity. South Africa signed the Rio Convention on Biological Diversity on 4 June 1994 and became a party to the convention on 2 November 1995. Subsequently produced a National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan which was received by the convention on 7 June 2006. The country is ranked 6th out of the world's 17 megadiverse countries. Ecotourism in South Africa has become more prevalent in recent years as a possible method of maintaining and improving biodiversity. Numerous mammals are found in the bushveld including lions, African leopards, South African cheetahs, southern white rhinos, blue wildebeest, kudus, impalas, hyenas, hippopotamuses, and South African giraffes. A significant extent of the bushveld exists in the northeast including Kruger National Park and the Sabai Sand Game Reserve, as well as in the far north in the Waterberg Biosphere. South Africa houses many endemic species, among them the critically endangered riverine rabbit in the Karoo. Up to 1945, more than 4,900 species of fungi including lichen-forming species had been recorded. In 2006, the number of fungi in South Africa was estimated at 200,000 species but did not take into account fungi associated with insects. If correct, then the number of South African fungi dwarfs that of its plants. In at least some major South African ecosystems, an exceptionally high percentage of fungi are highly specific in terms of the plants with which they occur. With more than 22,000 different vascular plants, or about 9% of all the known species of plants on Earth, South Africa is particularly rich in plant diversity. The most prevalent biome is the grassland, particularly on the Highveld, where the plant cover is dominated by different grasses, low shrubs, and acacia, mainly camelthorn, Vachellia areoloba. Vegetation is sparse towards the northwest because of low rainfall. There are numerous species of water-storing succulents, like aloes and euphorbias, in the very hot and dry Namaqualand area. And according to the World Wildlife Fund, South Africa is home to around a third of all succulent species. The grass and thorn savanna turns slowly into a bush savanna towards the northeast of the country, with denser growth. There are significant numbers of baobab trees in this area, near the northern end of Kruger National Park. The fynbos biome, which makes up the majority of the area and plant life in the Cape Floristic region, is located in a small region of the Western Cape and contains more than 9,000 of those species, or 3 times more plant species than found in the Amazon rainforest, making it among the richest regions on Earth in terms of plant diversity. Most of the plants are evergreen hardleaf plants with fine, needle-like leaves, such as the sclerophyllous plants. Another uniquely South African flowering plant group is the genus Protea, with around 130 different species. While South Africa has a great wealth of flowering plants, only 1% of the land is forest, almost exclusively in the humid coastal plain of KwaZulu-Natal, where there are also areas of southern Africa mangroves in river mouths. Even smaller reserves of forests are out of the reach of fire, known as montane forests. Plantations of imported tree species are predominant, particularly the non-native eucalyptus and pine. South Africa has lost a large area of natural habitat in the last 4 decades, primarily because of overpopulation, sprawling development patterns and deforestation during the 19th century. South Africa is one of the worst affected countries in the world when it comes to invasion by alien species, with blackwattle, Port Jackson willow, hakea, lantana, and jacaranda posing a significant threat to the native biodiversity and the already scarce water resources. Also, woody plant encroachment of native plants in grasslands poses a threat to biodiversity and related ecosystem services, affecting over 7 million hectares. The original temperate forest found by the first European settlers was exploited until only small patches remained. Currently, South African hardwood trees like real yellowwood, stinkwood, and South African black ironwood are under strict government protection. Statistics from the Department of Environmental Affairs show a record 1,215 rhinos were killed in 2014. Since South Africa is home to a third of all succulent species, many endemic to the Karoo, it makes it a hotspot for plant poaching, leading to many species to be threatened with extinction. Demographics. As of 2022, South Africa is a nation of about 62 million people of diverse origins, cultures, languages, and religions. According to the United Nations World Population Prospects, South Africa's total population was 55.3 million in 2015, compared to only 13.6 million in 1950. South Africa is home to an estimated 5 million illegal immigrants, including some 3 million Zimbabwean. A series of anti-immigrant riots occurred beginning in May 2008. Statistics South Africa asks people to describe themselves in the census in terms of 5 racial population groups. The 2022 census figures for these groups were Black African at 81%, Colored at 8.2%, White at 7.3%, Indian or Asian at 2.7%, and Other at 0.5%. The first census in 1911 showed that whites made up 22% of the population. This had declined to 16% by 1980. South Africa hosts a sizable refugee and asylum seeker population. According to the World Refugee Survey 2008, published by the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, this population numbered approximately 144,700 in 2007. Groups of refugees and asylum seekers numbering over 10,000 included people from Zimbabwe, 48,400, the DRC, 24,800, and Somalia, 12,900. These populations mainly lived in Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, and Port Elizabeth. Languages. South Africa has 12 official languages: Zulu, Xhosa, Afrikaans, English, PD, Tswana, Southern Sotho, Tsonga, Swazi, Venda, and Southern Ndebele, as well as South African Sign Language, which was recognized as an official language in 2023. In this regard, it is fourth only to Bolivia, India, and Zimbabwe. According to the 2022 census, the three most spoken first languages are Zulu, 24.4%, Xhosa, 16.6%, and Afrikaans, 10.6%. Although English is recognized as the language of commerce and science, it is only the fifth most common home language, that of only 8.7% of South Africans in 2022. Estimates based on the 1991 census suggest just under half of South Africans could speak English. It is the second most commonly spoken language outside of the household, after Zulu. Other languages are spoken, or were widely used previously, including Fanagalo, Ko, Lobadu, Nama, Northern Ndebele, and Futhi. Many of the unofficial languages of the San and Koko peoples contain regional dialects stretching northwards into Namibia and Botswana, and elsewhere. These people, who are a physically distinct population from the Bantu people who make up most of the black Africans in South Africa, have their own cultural identity based on their hunter-gatherer societies. They have been marginalized, and the remainder of their languages are in danger of becoming extinct. White South Africans also speak European languages including Italian, Portuguese, also spoken by black Angolans and Mozambicans, Dutch, German, and Greek. While some Indian South Africans and more recent migrants from South Asia speak Indian languages, such as Gujarati, Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, and Urdu. French is spoken by migrants from Francophone Africa. Religion. According to the 2001 census, Christians accounted for 79.8% of the population, with a majority members of various Protestant denominations and minority of Roman Catholics and other Christians. Christian category includes Zion Christian, 11.1%, Pentecostal, Charismatic, 8.2%, Roman Catholic, 7.1%, Methodist, 6.8%, Dutch Reformed, 6.7%, and Anglican, 3.8%. Members of remaining Christian churches accounted for another 36% of the population. Muslims accounted for 1.5% of the population, Hindus 1.2%, traditional African religions 0.3%, and Judaism 0.2%. 15.1% had no religious affiliation. African-initiated churches formed the largest of the Christian groups. It was believed that many of the persons who claimed no affiliation with any organized religion adhered to a traditional African religion. There are an estimated 200,000 traditional healers, and up to 60% of South Africans consult these healers, generally called Sangoma or Inyanga. These healers use a combination of ancestral spiritual beliefs and belief in the spiritual and medicinal properties of local fauna, flora, and fungi commonly known as muti, medicine, to facilitate healing in clients. Many peoples have syncretic religious practices combining Christian and indigenous influences. South African Muslims comprise mainly Coloureds and Indians. They have been joined by black or white South African converts as well as those from other parts of Africa. South African Muslims describe their faith as the fastest growing religion of conversion in the country, with the number of black Muslims growing sixfold, from 12,000 in 1991 to 74,700 in 2004. There is a substantial Jewish population, descended from European Jews who arrived as a minority among other European settlers. This population peaked in the 1970s at 118,000, though only around 75,000 remain today, the rest having emigrated, mostly to Israel. Even so, these numbers make the Jewish community in South Africa the 12th largest in the world. Economy. South Africa has a mixed economy. In Africa, the country's economy is the most industrialized and technologically advanced, as well as the largest. It also has a relatively high gross domestic product per capita compared to other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, $16,080 at purchasing power parity as of 2023, ranked 95th. Despite this, South Africa is still burdened by a relatively high rate of poverty and unemployment and is ranked in the top 10 countries in the world for income inequality measured by the Gini coefficient. South Africa is ranked 40th by total wealth, making it the second wealthiest country in Africa. In terms of private wealth, South Africa has a private wealth of $651 billion, making South Africa's population the richest in Africa, followed by Egypt with $307 billion and Nigeria with $228 billion. Approximately 55.5%, 30.3 million people, of the population is living in poverty at the national upper poverty line, while a total of 13.8 million people, 25% of the population, are experiencing food poverty. Unlike most of the world's poor countries, South Africa does not have a thriving informal economy. Only 15% of South African jobs are in the informal sector, compared with around half in Brazil and India and nearly 3/4 in Indonesia. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development attributes this difference to South Africa's widespread welfare system. World Bank research shows that South Africa has one of the widest gaps between per capita GDP versus its Human Development Index ranking, with only Botswana showing a larger gap. Mining. Mining has been a major component of South Africa's economy throughout its history. Until 2006, South Africa was the world's largest gold producer for almost a century. By the end of 2009, gold mining in South Africa declined rapidly, having produced 205 metric tons of gold in 2008 compared to 1,000 metric tons produced in 1970, almost 80% of the world's mine supply at the time. Despite this, the country still has 6,000 tons of gold reserves and is still number 5 in gold production and remains a cornucopia of mineral riches. South Africa is home to world's deepest gold mine. Mponeng Gold Mine, reaching nearly 4,000 meters depth, is the world's largest producer of chrome, manganese, platinum, vanadium and vermiculite. It is the second largest producer of ilmenite, palladium, rutile and zirconium. It is the world's third largest coal exporter. It is a huge producer of iron ore. In 2012, it overtook India to become the world's third biggest iron ore supplier to China, the world's largest consumers of iron ore. Tourism. South Africa is a tourist destination, with the tourist industry accounting for 2.34% of GDP in 2019, followed by a sharp drop in 2020 to 0.81% of GDP due to lack of travel caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The official marketing agency for the country, South African Tourism, is responsible for marketing South Africa to the world. According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, the tourism industry directly contributed ZAR 102 billion to South African GDP in 2012 and supports 10.3% of jobs in the country. The official national marketing agency of the South African government, with the goal of promoting tourism in South Africa both locally and globally, is known as South African Tourism. South Africa offers both domestic and international tourists a wide variety of options, among others the picturesque natural landscape and game reserves, diverse cultural heritage and highly regarded wines. Some of the most popular destinations include several national parks, such as the expansive Kruger National Park in the north of the country, the coastlines and beaches of the KwaZulu-Natal and Western Cape provinces, and the major cities like Cape Town, Johannesburg and Durban. According to Statistics South Africa's latest tourism and migration survey, almost 3.5 million travelers passed through the country's ports of entry in August 2017. The top 5 overseas countries with the largest number of tourists visiting South Africa were the US, UK, Germany, Netherlands and France. Most of the tourists arriving in South Africa from elsewhere in Africa came from SADC countries. Zimbabwe tops the list at 31%, followed by Lesotho, Mozambique, Eswatini and Botswana. In addition, Nigeria was the country of origin for nearly 30% of tourists arriving in South Africa. Roads. South Africa has a total road network of 750,000 kilometers, the largest of any African country and the 12th largest in the world. According to SANRAL, the road network is valued at more than R2.1 trillion. SANRAL manages national roads and has a network of 197 kilometers of paved roads. Provinces are responsible for 951 kilometers, while, according to the DOT, the municipal network is estimated at 661 kilometers of the proclaimed network. The rest are unproclaimed gravel roads, mainly serving rural communities, and are therefore not owned or maintained by any road authority. The country has more than 12 million motor vehicles with an average density of 16 motor vehicles per kilometer. The provincial road network is about 222,951 kilometers in length, consisting of 178,137 kilometers of unpaved and 52,114 kilometers of paved roads. Railways. Rail transport in South Africa is an important element of the country's transport infrastructure. All major cities are connected by rail. Transnet Freight Rail mainly operates freight services, while Prasa operates commuter services. State-owned utility Transnet Freight Rail is the largest freight rail transport operator on the African continent. The company maintains a rail network of approximately 31,000 kilometers, but only 20,900 kilometers of this are in use. South Africa's railway system is the most developed and largest in Africa, as well as the 13th largest in the world. However, vandalism, theft, and underinvestment has left the overall condition of the majority of networks in a poor state. Freight, passenger, and port capacity shortages remain a severe constraint in domestic and regional trade. Coal and iron ore are mainly transported on these lines. The country's rail network carried nearly 230 million tons of freight in 2017. However, this has declined to 179 million tons in 2021, and it is likely that efforts will be made to revitalize these transport sectors through private sector partnerships. Airports. South Africa has international airports in 6 cities: Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, Kimberley, and Nelspruit. As of 2021, South Africa had 407 airports, making it the leading country in Africa in terms of airport ownership, and the country ranked 20th globally. The 4 major airports in South Africa are OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg, Cape Town International Airport, King Shaka International Airport in Durban, and Chief David Stuurman International Airport in Port Elizabeth. OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg is Africa's largest and busiest airport, which receives over 21 million passengers a year. During the 2022 Skytrax World Airport Awards, Cape Town International Airport was voted the best airport on the African continent for the 7th consecutive year. Durban's King Shaka International Airport was voted the 2nd best in Africa, and Johannesburg's OR Tambo International Airport came 3rd place. Science and technology. Several important scientific and technological developments originated in South Africa. South Africa ranked 59th in the Global Innovation Index in 2023, up from 63rd in 2019. The first human-to-human heart transplant was performed by cardiac surgeon Christiaan Barnard at Groote Schuur Hospital in December 1967. Max Thaler developed a vaccine against yellow fever. Alan MacLeod Cormack pioneered X-ray computed tomography, CT scan. Aaron Klug developed crystallographic electron microscopy techniques. Cormack and Klug received Nobel Prizes for their work. Sidney Brenner won in 2002 for his pioneering work in molecular biology. Mark Shuttleworth founded an early internet security company Thought. South Africa has cultivated a burgeoning astronomy community. It hosts the Southern African Large Telescope, the largest optical telescope in the Southern Hemisphere. South Africa is currently building the Karoo Array Telescope as a pathfinder for €1.5 billion square kilometre array project. Transport. Modes of transport include roads, railways, airports, water, and pipelines for petroleum oil. The majority of people in South Africa use informal minibus taxis as their main mode of transport. Bus rapid transit has been implemented in some cities in an attempt to provide more formalized and safer public transport services. South Africa has many major ports including Cape Town, Durban, and Port Elizabeth that allow ships and other boats to pass through, some carrying passengers and some carrying petroleum tankers. Water supply and sanitation. Two distinctive features of the South African water sector are the policy of free basic water and the existence of water boards, which are bulk water supply agencies that operate pipelines and sell water from reservoirs to municipalities. These features have led to significant problems concerning the financial sustainability of service providers, leading to a lack of attention to maintenance. Following the end of apartheid, the country had made improvements in the levels of access to water as those with access increased from 66% to 79% from 1990 to 2010. Sanitation access increased from 71% to 79% during the same period. However, water supply and sanitation has come under increasing pressure in recent years despite a commitment made by the government to improve service standards and provide investment subsidies to the water industry. The eastern parts of South Africa suffer from periodic droughts linked to the El Niño weather phenomenon. In early 2018, Cape Town, which has different weather patterns to the rest of the country, faced a water crisis as the city's water supply was predicted to run dry before the end of June. Water-saving measures were in effect that required each citizen to use less than 50 liters per day. Cape Town rejected an offer from Israel to help it build desalination plants. Culture. The South African black majority still has a substantial number of rural inhabitants who lead largely impoverished lives. It is among these people that cultural traditions survive most strongly. As blacks have become increasingly urbanized and westernized, aspects of traditional culture have declined. Members of the middle class, who have historically been predominantly white but whose ranks include growing numbers of black, colored and Indian people, have lifestyles similar in many respects to that of people found in Western Europe, North America and Australasia. Arts. South African art includes the oldest art objects in the world, which were discovered in a South African cave and dated from roughly 75,000 years ago. The scattered tribes of the Khorasan peoples moving into South Africa from around 10,000 BC had their own fluent art styles seen today in a multitude of cave paintings. They were superseded by the Bantu and Nguni peoples with their own vocabularies of art forms. Forms of art evolved in the mines and townships, a dynamic art using everything from plastic strips to bicycle spokes. The Dutch-influenced folk art of the Afrikaner trekboers and the urban white artists, earnestly following changing European traditions from the 1850s onwards, also contributed to this eclectic mix which continues to evolve to this day. Popular culture. The South African media sector is large, and South Africa is one of Africa's major media centers. While the many broadcasters and publications reflect the diversity of the population as a whole, the most commonly used language is English. However, all 10 other official languages are represented to some extent or another. There is great diversity in South African music. Black musicians have developed unique styles called Kwaito and Amapiano that is said to have taken over radio, television, and magazines. Of note is Brenda Fassie, who launched to fame with her song Weekend Special, which was sung in English. More famous traditional musicians include Ladysmith Black Mambazo, while the Soweto String Quartet performs classical music with an African flavor. South Africa has produced world-famous jazz musicians, notably Hugh Masekela, Jonas Gwangwa, Abdullah Ibrahim, Miriam Makeba, Jonathan Butler, Chris McGregor, and Satima Bea Benjamin. Afrikaans music covers multiple genres, such as the contemporary Steve Hofma, the punk rock band Folkhof Palesika, and the singer-songwriter Jeremy Loop's South African popular musicians that have found international success include Manfred Mann, Johnny Clegg, rap-rave duo Die Antwoord, Tyler, and rock band Seether. Rappers such as AKA, Nasty C, and Casper Nyovest gained notoriety in other avenues like the BET Awards for Best African Acts. Although few South African film productions are known outside South Africa, many foreign films have been produced about South Africa. Arguably, the most high-profile film portraying South Africa in recent years was District 9 and its upcoming sequel, as well as Chappie. Other notable exceptions are the film Tsotsi, which won the Academy Award for Foreign Language Film at the 78th Academy Awards in 2006, as well as Ukamani Kyalitha, which won the Golden Bear at the 2005 Berlin International Film Festival. In 2015, the Oliver Hermanus film The Endless River became the first South African film selected for the Venice Film Festival. Cuisine. The cuisine of South Africa is diverse, and foods from many different cultures and backgrounds are enjoyed by all communities, and especially marketed to tourists who wish to sample the large variety available. The cuisine is mostly meat-based and has spawned the distinctively South African social gathering known as the braai, a variation of the barbecue. South Africa has also developed into a major wine producer, with some of the best vineyards lying in valleys around Stellenbosch, Franschhoek, Paarl, and Barrydale. Sports. South Africa's most popular sports are association football, rugby union, and cricket. Other sports with significant support are swimming, athletics, golf, boxing, tennis, rugby league, ringball, field hockey, surfing, and netball. Although football, soccer, commands the greatest following among the youth, other sports like basketball, judo, softball, and skateboarding are becoming increasingly popular amongst the populace.